I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. One way in which political life is different from personal life is expectation setting. In our personal lives, at work, with friends, we tend to underpromise, remain humble, and try to overdeliver. But in politics or public life, there are structural incentives to overpromise and underdeliver. Vote for me, they say, and I will get you a new HVAC in your school building. Once elected and facing the realities of governance, there is the backtrack. You are number 35 on the list of HVAC projects. Let's revisit next year. Truth be told, any situation that requires selling is predisposed to overpromise and underdelivery. There is even a great American saying for it: fake it till you make it. But in our personal lives, we try to take our business, our relationships, our lives toward people who say less and do more. Even politicians who routinely overpromise, underdeliver, if you know them personally, they will say less and do more. But somehow when it comes to mass politics, the logic inverts. It pays to overpromise when gathering up votes, but that almost always guarantees underdelivery because overpromises, by definition, cannot be kept. And political acumen, that elusive quality, also known as charisma, is measured by how a leader reframes the underdelivery. If incumbency rates are any indication, this too is a widespread skill. The expectation setting problem in public life is not limited to elected officials, but also to their designees, agency heads, and deputies who engage as well in the political function of gathering up public opinion in order to demonstrate support for and possibly the wisdom of their own projects. They may seem to be another item on the I Hate Politics zeitgeist list, but before we go pointing fingers, consider our own complicity. We produce the incumbency effect. And really, to what extent do we insist that political promises be achievable? Two recent interviews, one on Montgomery County Public Schools' efforts to expand magnet and specialty programs, and the other on the renewal of the Interstate Chesapeake Watershed Agreement, offered two case studies on the political problem of overpromise and underdelivery. Byron Johns, the chair of the Montgomery County NAACP Parents Council, and one of two co-founders of the group known as the Black and Brown Coalition for Education Excellence, had written a letter recently in support of the proposal to create 6 new programmatic regions within MCPS to vastly expand magnet and special programs. I asked him why he thought his plan would work when our reporting on I Hate Politics has indicated that it would not. And we ended up talking about the expectation delivery gap. Similarly, Christine Condon, environment reporter for the state news outlet Maryland Matters, had written a story on the renewal draft of the Chesapeake Watershed Agreement. And there it seems that the state of Maryland tried to push a draft destined to be rejected by other states. Why does this happen? How should we understand overpromise, underdelivery? Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program. If your goal is to make a meaningful impact with a career in local, state, or federal government, discover what this degree can do for you. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
Walked this road about 1,000 times. You think by now I would have got it right. Broken pieces to pick up again. Cycle back to where we began. But I don't mind. Maybe I don't mind suffocating, but I love the home to you every time.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Montgomery County native and now DC-based singer-songwriter Kara Levchenko's two new single releases, I Don't Mind and Tell Me What You Want. You can find her and her music at karalevchenko.com.
Suffocating, but I love the high. Coming on to you every time. Like a moth drawn to a flame. I find my way.
Byron Johns, welcome to I Hate Politics. Recently, you wrote an open letter in support of MCPS's program change proposals after both Montgomery County Education Association, the teachers union, and the Montgomery County Council of PTAs formally spoke up against it. What is your argument?
The status quo today serves some communities in some areas of the county very well. They got lots of options. They have, they're very happy with it, which is why I think some of the, if you try to find what is the legitimate motivation that people are objecting to the programs, is like, hey, status quo is working for me. So that's all that matters.
I think they all agree that some parts of the county are left behind and some parts get too much. And I don't think you'll get push on that. The issue that I keep facing is whether the plans that MCPS is offering will actually do what they say they will do.
I haven't seen this movie over 8 superintendents before. What is on paper, and in my own industry, what is on paper is rarely ever what actually is implemented 100% as it was written. I don't think that's a legitimate reason to not. The way I frame this when we talk about it is, look, if we agree status quo is not serving all students well, and we agree that expanding the number of seats and making it a proximity so people aren't having to spend an hour and a half on the buses going across the county, if lowering those barriers is a good thing, then at that conceptual level, this regional framework at least seems to address some of those big problems. Well, now you get into the next level. How's that going to implement in this region over by Kennedy versus how is it going to be over by Whitman? I think we've got a lot of bright people in this county that help work with the system to make the implementation. And it will not be perfect. I have advocated, as we did in our note, that there are program deserts in parts of the county.
Why not reforest that desert?
That's how you get this patchwork over 20 years. We're just going to add something else here. And as long as, you got infinite budgets and infinite resources, you can do that. That's not the world. That's not the world we're likely to be in for a while. And it's time to step back and really take a systems approach. We've added almost $1 billion in the operating budget in the last 5 years. That's extraordinary. I don't necessarily agree that there's a lack of ability to implement. I think it will take time. It will not be a big flash. It will be implemented in phases.
2027 is when they start ninth grade with the new 30 programs. Those need to be staffed.
Well, again, that makes a lot of assumptions about the whole implementation, the budgets. There are a lot of unknowns.
But MCPS is asking a lot of people to buy in with all these uncertainties in place.
The loudest voices manage to somehow get what they when they want it. This idea, well, we just need to slow down and we think about it. We were involved with it the latter part of last school year. So it's been well over 6 months.
Have they cracked the staffing issue?
The staffing is allocated by formulas. You're going to have people who have best fit degrees. We're certainly going to be constrained by the certain staff that we have because we have contractual, obligations for these folks. You're not going to do a wholesale swap out of one set of folks who are different. So I think those are details to be laid out.
Their argument is that there's enough talent in MCPS to do this, and I do not disagree. I agree with the fact that there's significant staff talent.
Right.
It's just that the numbers are not there. Now we are going to start several new programs that will have a high degree of rigor. I interviewed the early coordinator of the Blair Science and Math program and the Poolsville Science and Math program, just to understand what is it that they did. And they're going to do 6 of these. I cannot imagine what it will take to retrain teachers to do this in 6 different locations in the county. And whether those teachers are even available. So one of the things they said is that those programs have 8 periods. Every high school has 7. Now you're going to put 8 period programs in every high school. How is that going to even work out? And then there's got to be flexibility with respect to joint teaching. They were able to change the pacing guides. They were able to change the curriculum. They took out repetition from the curriculum.
When Poolsville first started, it was, quote, the new questionable program. And over time, it developed a reputation. It's not going to be perfect. When we want to do something, when the gifted and talented program wants to do it, they don't want all this detail. They don't care. They want it that it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and we'll work with you to make it more rigorous, to make it better as it goes time. We get started. What I hear too much of is, well, for something that's going to benefit other communities, Black, brown, low income, Asian, low income, white kids who currently don't have the same number of opportunities, we got to have 15 decimal places of detail. In politics and in industry and everything, you don't want to do something, you put together a commission, you study it, you study it, and you study it.
You have death by committee. There are holes that are already there. Most people I speak to recognize these holes. They know these have to be filled and would encourage these to be filled. The problem is it is not compatible with a massive systems overhaul where you have to now think about doing 30 different programs instead of doing 3. If they said, we're going to do 3 more programs, let's fill these 3 holes, and then come back next year and do another 3.
Well, we may disagree at some level on that, because I was at a budget advisory meeting recently. Somebody was basically saying what you just said. It's like, hey, let's just focus on the areas that have desert. I said, okay, then what? Well, then since you don't like a 6-region model, why don't we call it the 1, 2, 3 model? We'll do the one that's the desert, then we'll do 2 after that, and then we'll do 3 after that. And there'll be your 6 regions after that. So if that's how in practical implementation.
That's not what they're saying, though.
What they're saying is trying to get people bought into the idea of a 6-region model. How they implement that, I think there's many details to be worked out, and especially, the placements, the budgets, the declining enrollments.
I'm having difficulty seeing how you're going to give these programs the autonomy necessary to make them actually be rigorous. So that's my first.
Yeah, but you're coming up with just reasons. There are lots of ways to come up with what are the 50 questions they've got to answer before everybody's on board. I have no doubt there are many unanswered questions. Are they significant? Are they necessary to answer before we get started? In my experience over many years in business and everywhere else, no. When it's the right
But this is
thing
not
to
a
do,
business.
get
This is
started.
people's kids.
This is a business. It's a $3.6 billion enterprise.
It's a public agency.
It is. I don't mean a business in that context, but I mean it is operating, it is spending resources to deliver services. And in that sense, if this is making progress, as I believe, and it's going to support more kids and provide things that status quo doesn't, then we need to get started with that.
What is MCPS's central mission for several years now, like maybe 10, maybe even longer, that we meet every child with? That's what they say. Did they succeed?
Well, I mean, the evidence is pretty clear.
Evidence is pretty clear, right? So MCPS has an overpromise underdelivery problem. They promise and they don't deliver.
Mm.
Details matter. You can say these questions don't need to be answered. Maybe some of them don't, but some of them do. I mean, I have difficulty going back to staffing or the curriculum. Will these new programs have the autonomy necessary to create the level of programming that we have seen in other successful examples in the county of how this has been done? We don't know. You know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid that what these programs may end up being is one elective class every year, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th.
Yeah.
And then some kind of name slapped on it.
I don't have any reason to believe that that's true or that's going to I'm not seeing that be the case that I can think of. I can't think of any scenario where that's true. It is good timing for a couple of reasons to address these programs. One, if nothing else, and the reason they've talked about it together is the boundaries. Because what program is in which school and what area very much determines capacity. And part of what you're solving is trying to deal with the overcapacity situations in a number of facilities that they have. So saying, and the idea, well, we should delay this, but we're going to set the boundary. Well, there's no way in hell you're going to come back to address boundaries, do boundaries again in a year or two. It's just too massive, too painful an effort. You've got to solve both at the same time to find a valid solution set.
One of the insights that came out of my interview with Jeannie Franklin and Angela McLean was that the regions would predominate over the problem of school boundaries. Boundaries are legally driven. The programs are not legally driven, and yet they will be the super boundaries, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, again, the number crunchers can figure out the paths for that.
The problem is in the details, though. It's not that MCPS doesn't have good plans. MCPS repeatedly has good plans. MCPS has repeatedly good missions. MCPS has repeatedly good motivations. But the delivery is the issue.
We're in violent agreement there. I just went off on them about this. I hear them often talk about, well, we're going to provide professional training. You don't need to provide any more professional training if you cannot hold people accountable and evaluate them on their performance. One of the reasons their implementation sucks is they do not evaluate the staff.
And most of the training that people complain about. I've done that episode too.
If in my company, I said, look, here's what we're going to be doing. And the people in the staff could say, I don't need to go. I'm not going to do that. And I don't evaluate them on how effectively they implement. Then setting goals and strategic plans is meaningless.
I have asked this question and have not gotten an answer with respect to the program analysis.
Yeah. Well, the program analysis, they haven't updated their evaluation system in 20 years. And the fact that you could have people, and don't get me started on this. I have seen some extraordinarily talented teachers who put in the extra effort and all that be just beat down because they're there because they care. They see what the kids need. They actually do that. And they get treated as if, you're disrupting the our agreement. For me, having been in management for better part of 40 years, if I can't say, here's the goal I want to have done, we need to achieve as an organization, and everyone down the chain is evaluated on contributing to that goal, then you have lost the ability to manage the implementation of anything.
Well, there are two things that I think we have to answer within the way that you describe the problem. One is public agencies are not run as private companies.
No, that's that.
People that believe that government should somehow be run like a private enterprise are finding out that that's not how things run.
No, let's not put those words in my mouth. That's not what I said.
You say that, having run a private company for this long, this is what I believe, right? Yeah, I understand that MCPS is an entity that needs to be efficiently governed and all of that, but it's a public agency. It is not ever going to be governed like Lockheed Martin.
Absolutely.
That's not absolutely.
Yeah,
That's never ever should happen.
No disagreement.
No should happen.
No disagreement. Absolutely right.
I think
however, human behavior is still
human behavior. No, I agree. But what I'm where the rubber meets the road for me is that, again, we have made these promises, right? And in the past, there's been under delivery, and that's what I'm trying to understand. That is this a method to move forward where we can prevent the under delivery? Because in the end, we are upset with MCPS because so many of our students are not meeting the basic standards of education, reading and math in third grade or eighth grade or 10th grade. One of the reasons why there's high frustration is because they say that they're going to do this, and then
that accountability has to get down. We can't just say we want the board to put together a strategic plan and what their goals are, or the superintendent. The accountability can't stop there. They're not. It has to roll down through the classroom.
Reforming teacher evaluation will solve this?
I think there is room for improvement.
Well, there's always room for improvement.
Well, then we need to start doing it because we haven't done it.
Overpromises are made in an effort to get buy-in without clearly understanding the limitations that there exist in the system on delivery. And so therefore, those overpromises are a political act.
The profound part of what you said is understanding what are the limitations and understanding and addressing those limitations. Having the ability to align all the way through from the very top right through to the front line, align the goals and the incentives and the evaluation would go a huge way.
If you could look at the one problem I just brought up, which is that these special programs need significant autonomy such that the rest of the school doesn't impinge on how they function. In terms of curriculum, in terms of pacing guides, in terms of block schedule, in terms of teachers being able to move between classes, in terms of one day a teacher teaching 8 classes and nothing on another. Just the fact that some of these programs have 8 periods rather than 7 is going to throw an administrative monkey wrench into every high school.
If, as we seem to be in agreement on, is MCPS's one of their failings has been overpromising and underdelivering, then why is that?
Why is that?
I think they really got to strengthen their management practice. I joke with the Superintendent Taylor. So I have never, for decades, I can't imagine. I poked with the last 3 superintendents about this. I don't understand how you could run an enterprise a $3 billion enterprise with 26,000 employees with paper timesheets. This is the first year that they're on electronic timesheets. And they were screaming and they're still screaming and hollering about, oh my God, this is so like.
But the execution was really bad.
Well, yes.
That's a great example of what needed to be done and to be done right, to be done well. There are hundreds of companies that use electronic timesheets. It is not any genius act. And they failed.
Yep, absolutely. They blew it.
Given this record, do you have confidence that the promises being made with respect to the program analysis are going to be delivered?
Yeah, I believe and I intend to.
But do you not see the connection between what they are doing with paper timesheets and program analysis?
No, I don't. I don't see the connection there. First off, they've been trying to implement an ERP system. It took more than 5 years. The idea that you wrote requirements probably 7-8 years ago, you think are still valid. The delay in getting things done creates its own problem. The reason I have some confidence is I think the current administration is open. They've been more transparent than I can remember. The whole pension benefits problem has been known for at least 3 superintendents, and it was always kick the can down the road. There's obviously a willingness to tackle some of these issues.
The one that actually really worked is the grading policy change.
Yes, I'll give you another small win. Why are we sending parents paper 6 months after the fact? What are we supposed to do with that? On top of that, half the parents never get it. It's sent home in that old, reliable, secure backpack. They now put the MCAP scores in parent view.
You want to take the ball 1 yard and 2 yards and 3 yards, and I totally understand, except with respect to the program analysis where you want to take the ball all the way to touchdown.
No, it's not. It's, you know what? It's, hey, the goal is, we know where the goal line is. You know, we got to call the right plays. We got to execute well. But let's agree that we know where the goal is.
Byron Johns, thank you for taking the time. I hope you'll come back and reevaluate, maybe in a few months.
I look forward to it, Sunil.
To see the night that we met is playing in my head. I can't help but fall in.
That's Byron Johns of the Montgomery County NAACP Parents Council and co-founder of the Black and Brown Coalition for Educational Excellence. He has recently written a public letter in support of MCPS's proposal to create 6 programmatic regions where each region will have 5 specialty programs, each totaling 30. The Montgomery County Education Association, MCEA, the Teachers Union, and the Montgomery County Council of PTAs have opposed the school district's proposal. You're listening to I Hate Politics. The music is from Kara Levchenko. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. I'll be back with Christine Condon of the state news outlet Maryland Matters to talk about the renewal of the Chesapeake Watershed Agreement, which ties the 7 states of the region together to improve water quality and life in the Chesapeake Bay.
Promise you I'll get it right. I'll get it right. I still have your sweater in my drawer. Reminds me of our lore. I've tried, but I can't throw it away now. I know we're not together, but I still love you. Hope it's fine that I said that. Meant the world when you said that. I took for granted all the nights that we shared. Something
Christine Condon, welcome back to I Hate Politics.
Thanks for having me again.
The Chesapeake Watershed Agreement is almost final now and is about to be signed. What has changed and what did the process reveal?
I don't know if they're going to officially sign it because they've been insistent that this is a revision of the old Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement from 2014. And it is. They pretty much went line by line through that document and made a series of changes and brought it, into the future. Obviously, their missed deadline was 2025, so now they're looking at what the heck do we do? And sort of the emerging document comes with a 2040 deadline, which is a bit of a departure from the document that was sent out to the public for comment originally earlier this year, which had a smattering of different deadlines depending on what provision of the agreement was being talked about, whether it was wetlands, whether it was blue crabs. There was different numbers associated with different parts of the agreement. But after public concern, they ironed it all out to 2040. But in terms of what this sort of discussion and the revision of this agreement revealed, I think it did reveal some interesting tension by the end between the Bay states, which we knew was present, but came to the surface in an interesting manner as Maryland officials from the Department of Natural Resources, after robust public comment that was pretty frustrated by the agreement and sort of cited a lack of ambition there, Maryland really pushed on a few things to try to get the agreement more ambitious. They wanted the whole thing to have a deadline of 2035. And that included changes to and wanted there to be a more aggressive commitment to reduce nutrients and sediment going into the bay. Maryland is pretty close to meeting its commitments, which is, has been really widely considered the toughest part of the Bay Agreement is to figure that out, because not only do you have more development in the watershed, you've got climate change, you're fighting all these different forces, but Maryland's doing, all right compared to a state like Pennsylvania, which is really quite behind. So Maryland, during this process, actively pushed, we want everything done by 2035. We want everyone to commit on the nutrients, and it didn't work. Maryland didn't really get any love for that. Virginia was like, okay, we'd be willing to say 2035 for the rest of the whole deal, but not the nutrient thing, right? Maryland stood alone on that one. And so you got to see some of that. I mean, they have all these, different committees. And the key one here is the Principal's Staff Committee, which is basically the governor's staff people, right? So in this case, the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, represented by Josh Kurtz, he chairs that committee, right? And I'm pretty sure it's pretty rare for them to actually take votes on things. So much of this partnership, they use the word partnership an awful lot. It's supposed to be, pretty unanimous, pretty much everyone agreeing on things, right? And that's sort of why maybe you see sometimes, because it's a consensus process, not everybody gets what they want, and the agreement may be less ambitious, right? But you actually saw them call a vote and indicate where the different states stood, which is actually kind of rare. For this partnership, I haven't seen an actual vote much before. So you actually got to see some of those tensions play out in an interesting manner this time around.
Now, what did Pennsylvania say? What I know you said Virginia said no to nutrients, but okay on everything else for 2035. What did Delaware say? I'm really surprised, by the way, that DC Department of Energy and Environment did not support.
Yeah, I mean, I think it wasn't just Pennsylvania. Pretty much all the other states balked at that kind of commitment. And I think a key thing to remember here is what was in there before Maryland proposed that, right? And so the Bay program is working on a new computer model that they hope will kind of tell them just how many more nutrients they have to reduce. But it's probably going to be more nutrients, not less nutrients, that they have to reduce, right? Because of the forces I mentioned, right? We're adding people and animals to the watershed. We're building buildings. We're making it harder and harder to fight all the runoff that's going into the Bay. That number's probably going to go up. So there is this computer model. And the previous draft that went out to the public was silent on meeting the nutrient goals and was just like, we're going to defer to this new computer model. And so I think, the states all were kind of surprised when Maryland was like, no, we want a hard deadline for that piece as well. It seemed in the meeting when Maryland proposed it, which was during a retreat that a lot of all the states attended, they kind of seemed surprised that there was going to be, and they kept saying, every state's in different positions with that. So it wouldn't be fair. But that had been the precursor. Like the 2014 agreement had, everyone committed to 2025. And you basically saw every other state kind of balk at that.
I understand the large structural objections, right? Lots of farmland in Pennsylvania, lots of non-point pollution from that farmland. Susquehanna that flows from Pennsylvania into Maryland, into the Chesapeake, is the biggest tributary. So there's all of those things. But have you had a chance at all to talk to anybody?
My focus has really been on Maryland's psyche here, and their frustrations. And you can tell that they were quite frustrated. and wanted to show the public, I think, because they were getting some public feedback that they perceived as pretty negative. They wanted to kind of show the public, like, look, we're trying, but we can't convince these other people, right? And so we've heard from them. I haven't had the chance to go state by state, but we've heard from them in meetings, the concerns that every state was in a different place, and that there wouldn't be agreement on a concrete date this time around, and the preference was to wait for computer modeling.
I can understand Pennsylvania, but I don't understand DC because that has no farmland.
I think it's actually DC and West Virginia, which have a smaller set of commitments on nutrients, and they're also pretty close as well.
Yeah, DC's close.
So I think some of that is not necessarily concerned just for their jurisdictions, but for the overall agreement and not wanting to have things set in stone. You have to remember, too, like the role in the partnership of, it's not just the states. The federal government is a signatory as well. The Chesapeake Bay Commission is a signatory as well. The signal from EPA is not that it doesn't seem as though they would want, that kind of thing as well.
Well, I mean, the Trump administration is clear about that. But again, the benefit is to the states here, to the watershed. That's why they're in the agreement, not simply because EPA is pushing or not pushing. And in fact, I mean, if the EPA is not pushing, I'd imagine that the states would pick up that slack rather than drop the whole line.
Well, that's what folks want. I mean, when you talk with advocates, they really are urging the states, and the states have said that they want to pick up that mantle. But it's an open question how much slack the states can pick up without a federal partner. I mean, you'll hear all the time the Chesapeake Bay program, all that goes into that, the science pieces, so many pieces of this overall agreement are federally funded.
Even if you stopped all research, whatever research exists today, if you got there by 2035, you'd have made progress.
The states are still committing to use those numbers in the meantime. And I've spoken with scientists who are familiar with what's happening with the new computer model, and they say, those commitments are not going to go down. It is not going to be easier to hit those nutrient numbers. They're going up.
Okay, so there's the TMDL issue, the total daily maximum load, which relates to nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, as well as the timing. Is there anything else in contention?
Yeah, I mean, this agreement is so wide-ranging. It includes everything from submerged aquatic vegetation and wetlands to forest conservation numbers. So there's so many different pieces of this. And, during the public comment period, a lot of folks highlighted that some of the numbers take, for instance, the goal for submerged aquatic vegetation, the underwater grasses that are a key part of the habitat in the bay, that a lot of the goals were revised downward after hitting 2025 and falling short by any thousands of acres, depending on the goal. And so that was a contentious point. A lot of those individual goals, and there are so many, a lot of folks wanted, let's be aggressive. Let's not just put a goal in there that's achievable by 2040, but one that we'll have to really sprint, to get there.
On the underwater grasses in particular, the states that are actually bordering the bay, so Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, that they would have the greatest exposure and commitment. Is it the case that in the case of the underwater grasses alone, that it is Maryland and Virginia that are interested in having lower standards?
The Maryland Department of Natural Resources and the University of Maryland, Center for Environmental Science and the Virginia Institute of Marine Science are going to be most heavily working on underwater grasses. But I think it's not, so I think they are leaders on those types of issues. But, the other states are in the partnership for a reason. They signed on to help improve the bay. And, there are also underwater grasses in the rivers.
The scaling back on the underwater grasses in particular is led by these two states, not by the others, I would imagine.
It's hard to tell. Again, there's so many goals and so much of this happens, in meetings that we don't get to see or meetings that are just I wish I had more time to attend. But I will say that Maryland had to kind of choose its battles here. And that's how it feels. It feels like Maryland was frustrated that it was getting, blowback and wanted to really pick key issues to fight on. And it chose a 2035 deadline for the whole agreement and to try to push to make that nutrient language more rock solid. with a 2035 deadline as well. So I think there was a battle choosing. And I think some of the individual discussion on, because there's so many different outcomes in this agreement, weren't as big of battles as trying to get the overarching agreement more aggressive, particularly with regard to runoff and pollution.
What about forest conservation? Was there differences between the states on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Honestly, that's not one I looked at super closely. Again, this thing is so big.
One theory of politics is that it is the art of the possible. On the core issue of nutrients, there is disagreement. On a deadline, there's disagreement. But if they were to be greater converge with respect to underwater grasses or forest conservation, would it not make sense to focus there and to get those small things, even as you wait on the big item? In effect, did Maryland choose to go for the big goal and perhaps miss out on doing the smaller things?
I think that they abandoned pushing for those goals. It just so happens that sort of those overarching goals are what they chose to really make a stand on and push to a vote. And I think the desire there was for the public to see that Maryland officials were pushing.
Right. So it's a public plane.
Secretary Josh Kurtz even put out like a news release and was like, look, Maryland's trying to make this agreement more aggressive. And that is the messaging they wanted to send to the public, was that they were fighting for the nutrients, fighting for a more aggressive deadline. Maybe because that would be the easiest thing to communicate to the public as, we're really pushing for this. I'm not sure What
about the idea that other states see Maryland as posturing for an internal message rather than actually getting things done?
You'd probably have to ask the other states, but I mean, I think Maryland did see an opportunity here to make a statement, and they chose to elevate those particular things to a vote, and they chose to, communicate to the public in that way and say, look, Maryland is proposing more aggressive terms, and they brought things to a vote to prove that they couldn't get an agreement. So much of what happens in the Bay program is this sort of behind the scenes consensus making, and there's so many discussions that we don't see, not necessarily because they're happening behind closed doors, maybe some of them are, but because there are just so many meetings. Like they just meet, they've been talking about this for so long that you have to tune in at key particular moments to check in on them, right? So there's so much different things happening that we don't really see a ton of unless you're glued to the laptop, I guess. And so Maryland chose these moments where it knew it could get attention by actually calling a vote on particular things.
So one success that I'm seeing what you're saying is that a criticism during the public comment time was that there were, several deadlines, and there was a ask from climate and environmental groups to say, give us one deadline that we can sell in order for them to reach out to their constituent for a messaging purpose, right? And they got that. I mean, they didn't get it at 2035, but they got it at 2040. So they did get a deadline. They did get a common deadline across the board, which can be communicated much better. That's what the climate groups were asking, right?
Yeah, that was one of the asks, was for that level of consistency, and I think a lot of it did have to do with communicating to the public. And I think those groups liked that common deadline for ease of holding the Bay states and the Bay program accountable too. Like you can say, all right, 2025. You know what I mean? It makes it a lot easier to, tell the public and also kind of build a campaign around, I think. So I think that was one of their asks. And I believe the Bay program was pushing more for a 2035 as well. But the outcome was 2040. And so, but I think that overall advocates are glad to have that partially for ease of communication.
The climate groups you talk to, the climate scientists you talk to, the officials you talk to, they are working on an area of, Chesapeake conservation, climate, all of those things are urgent, but not so urgent as defending democracy. Are they concerned that the defense of democracy itself, which is in the forefront today, is going to detract and harm the climate? Is the public now too consumed with what's going on in the political sphere and with democratic rights.
Interestingly, during this process, you saw several prominent Bay scientists come out and express frustration. That in the original draft, during that period, you saw the frustration that it felt like the can was being kicked down the road. You saw op-eds and I spoke with several folks who have been in Bay circles for decades and are just throwing their hands up. Like, how are we signing another, revised agreement that doesn't really commit us to reducing nutrients in the way that we should be? And I don't want to speak for them because I haven't spoken to them, specifically about all the, democratic concerns, small d democratic concerns that you mentioned. But if I could speak for them a bit, if there is a crisis of democracy in this country that harms the environment too, if the government is more beholden to special interests or whatever it may be, a government that isn't as vigilant, a government that is preoccupied with other matters is a danger to the environment, a danger to the Bay.
Christine Condon, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Find me in the crowd tonight, tongue-tied. Dance with me under cotton candy skies. We can leave the pain of the past behind, lean into the moment, dancing the night away. We can have whatever we want, start a renaissance. I could be a confidant, baby, won't you tell me what you want?
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics and government and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Montgomery County native and now DC-based singer-songwriter Kara Levchenko's two new single releases, I Don't Mind and Tell Me What You Want. You can find her and her music at karalevchenko.com. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Go to bed. We can watch all the colored lights again. We can leave the pain of the past behind, lean into the moment, dancing the night away. We can have whatever we want, start a renaissance. I could be a confidant. Tell me what you want.